Helen of Foregates by Ethel Carnie. Chapter 5. Helen visits a stranded female. When Martin had been thinking of Helen as waiting for him in the farm, she had not been there at all. After tea was cleared away, she had sat by the table till dusk fell, and the lamp was lit. Old Mason sat in the ingle nook, his eyes closed, his legs crossed. He looked like some evil god. He was not asleep. At times he shot a loud and unexpected laugh into the stillness to test Helen's nerves. But the pale woman, with her hand resting listlessly on the story of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire, did not start. The old strong stillness that had been rent from her in the stress of the morning had closed round her again. Her eyes, wide and dark, stared at a big ash-coloured moth fluttering round the flame of the lamp. She had commanded the tramp, who was sitting on the other side the table, to catch and put it out into the garden. He answered by dropping the insect on the live coals. From the shadowy corner that cross-legged giant had laughed again. Looking stealthily towards Helen, he saw the listlessness of the pale woman, broken by a flash of hatred, as she looked at the tramp. Then she had turned to her book once more. A knock came to the door. Helen opened it. The scent of wet lad's love came to her. "Please, Miss Marsh is poorly, and says will you come," piped the treble of little Agnes Tripp. "Come in, Aggie," said Helen, and led her in by the hand. "Your bonnet's untied," she continued, and stooped to make a bunch under the little soft chin. The look of passionless endurance was gone. The curves of the lips softened. In the stoop of the slim figure was the ancient graciousness of the mother. Her glance devoured the soft little face, its childish colouring. Then, carried out of her habitual reserve, she bent and touched Aggie's cheek with her lips. From his corner old Mason watched her. The gleam of a sudden idea shot into his half-opened eyes. "Weren't dark coming up here, Aggie?" asked the woman, who had no fear for herself. She was stooping again, arranging the ribbons on her bonnet. Her voice had a croon in it, the croon that only Martin had heard. "I'm flayed of the lone," confessed the child, looking up into that pale face. "I don't like sleeping by myself." She slid her hand into Helen's. The sight of the moss-headed old man in the corner scared her. Again the old man laughed. "Some are born to have bedmates, Aggie, and some to go out, and always being lone, day and night. And then, when they put to bed with a spade with their heads on gravel, they go on sleeping by themselves in the lone and dark. There's many such in Foregates churchyard. Miss Marsh'll be one. There's many such. Helen, there's nothing to be flayed on in lone or in dark, Aggie," said Helen. "Then you're not flayed of the lone?" asked Aggie. Helen did not answer. The old man laughed viciously from the chimney nook. His daughter took no notice. She was watching the clock. She had moved to the table and leaned upon it. There was only the tick of the clock, the fall of a cinder, the growling of the dog from under the settle, in its old antipathy to the tramp. "Art a going, Helen?" asked the old man. "Has Miss Marsh sent for the doctor?" Helen asked the child, ignoring the query. She shook her head. "Aren't any of the neighbours going in?" "They've all fallen out here," said Aggie. "She were once a fine given lass, Sue Marsh," continued the old man, as if speaking to himself. "She'd again Joe her soul, and asked him what he wanted after that, but he were like chap who were told by butcher that the beefsteak were tender as a woman's heart, and asked for sausages. He left her, Joe Gillibrand did, and shipped to America. Wanted to get out of her way. She liked him too much. It sort of tired him. Men be built that way, Helen. Aye, queer fish we are. So Sue were left, and she grew into a selfish, grabbing, crotchety, twisted thing like she is now. Some women are so. Some goes out of themselves with being left alone, and some goes in and moulders there, and the stronger they are, the more twisted they get, unless they're Christians, when they tap to dogs and cats and other folks' childer, and meddling with other folks' troubles. But Sue was a strong, proud, axing lass, as wanted summat for hersel, summat all her own. Summat o' thy mat, Helen." His daughter stared back into the malignity of his eyes. "I'd never be left," she said tonelessly. Soon Marsh were to blame. What did she let him leave her for? If she couldn't out him, it served her right, being left alone. As she spoke, she was moving towards the clothes closet, and a moment later took out her black cloak. "Thou'rt going then, Helen?" queried the old man. "Aye," she answered. "And what about Martin's supper?" he asked. "Martin mun get what he can catch," she said. "When wilt I be back?" asked her father. "I'll be back by noon, whatever happens," she said, donning her cloak. The old man was looking at her. "Thou looks like a nun in that, Helen," he said jeeringly. "Look at her," addressing the tramp. "Isn't she like a nun? Hee, look at her, her earn, her lips, her forehead. Don't she look like she could say good-bye to the world and fix her eyes on glory to come? Hee." Helen regarded both the grinning faces. Her own was calm. A faint smile was written upon it. "If any took it into their heads to break me up alive," she said, "they'd be fain to let me out." "There be holiness for thee, Helen," "Hee," said her father. "Life, all on it, is holy enough for me," she said. "I'd hate to have a halo painted round my head to set me up above the others. I'd sooner be buried in a red shroud than a white, with those little forget-me-nots at my breast and my hands crossed. 'Twould be a lie to send me to the grave so. I'd fight with me teeth and me nails to be what nature meant me to be. 'Twould be hard for them that brick me up alive. Look at my earn and my lips, and don't think I'm ashamed of 'em, or ever will be. Nobody'll ever make me shamed of life, all on it." Taking Aggie by the hand, she went out into the blue dusk. The laughter of her father and the tramp followed them out. Old Mason left his seat and peered through the crack in the window blind. "She's carrying her," he said with a fierce joy in his tone. "Carrying her, and thinking how 'twould be sweeter still if she were hers and Martin's, thinking how she'd go through hell for such joy, and laugh at it all the while. She were made to live and love and give and take, more than most, as if to make her suffer more, and she shall go down to her bed in the dark with empty arms, and suffering barren of fruit, and the love of her heart dried up like burning sand was poured into it, bricked up alive. She'll be fain to be that, and won't have that peace. They and me to watch her day like she be a prisoner to watch her in her agonies, when she fain creep away like an animal. She's built to creep in a hole when hurt, and always 4 eyes a watch on her, so that she cannot weep, nor pray, nor cry out, but we'll hear her, and never a child's eyes to look at the sadness of her face, and at the end, for I'll live to see th' end, for she'll break to pieces under it, to hear her wail at her life without flowers or fruitage, and then, it's sad, but she'll get away from me then, and as she does she'll think of Martin and how she'll sleep in thy grave when she hates thee, and thee and me'll stand by to watch her, and as she goes I'll tell her how Martin left her, and 'twas all for nothing, for nothing." He sat down in his chair in the nook, laughing horribly. Then he looked across at Fielding Day. "How much of a brute art her, Field?" he asked curiously. "She has a way with her," warningly. "Martin has been struggling to get away these 5 years. She might beat thee." A thin thread of fear was in his voice. Day, craving to be a tin god, was yet a man. There were brute beasts that women turned into men sometimes. If this happened, his revenge became a broken thing. He looked at Day. There were no signs of softness in that wolfish grin. "I'll make her my slave, or I'll bray her to a mortar," said the tramp. "I've said it once before. I'll break her heart, or I'll break her neck." Old Mason's eyes glittered. Then a shadow crossed his brow. "But," he said, "the mind of her mon, the mind that looks out of her e'en, the soul of her, as parson would say, what about that? 'Twould escape thee somehow like quicksilver. I've bruised her flesh often when she were a child, but her ear always stared at me so, like summat I couldn't get at. What about that?" Fielding laughed shortly. "When a boss had my body," he said, "he had my soul, if I've got one, damn him. She never belonged to anyone before, remember that. It's only been negative suffering. Wait till it gets to the positive. Give me her body, and I'll put her soul through hellfire. But it's against human nature to do things like that for now, and every time I put the screw on, I'll want some compensation for the loss my moral balance has sustained." He looked gravely at the old man. Old Mason looked back at him steadily. Then he burst out laughing, and Fielding Day joined. "To th' end of my fortune, Day," said the old man, regarding him again. "Let me see fear look out of her e'en, the fear I felt in my heart all them years back, lest her mother leave me. Let me see it, I'll pay for it. 20 shillings to the pound." Helen left Aggie at the door of the Tripps' cottage, and went on towards that where Sue Marsh lived. She was somewhat surprised at Sue sending for her. Except for comments on the weather, the two women were not intimate. It was the last house in Fourgates. When Helen stood before the rickety gate, she saw that the white blinds were dropped to the bottom. No ray of firelight or lamplight radiated the house. On the doorstep, Sue's blind white cat, Mary, mewed for admittance. Helen knocked on the door. The sounds echoed as through an empty shell. Then there was deep silence. At length Helen caught faint sounds. It was a weird murmur of pain drawn from unwilling lips, mingled with a noise like the chattering of teeth. Helen pressed the latch down, but the door did not yield. Sue was locked in. She might be dying, but had not unlocked her door, lest she be robbed. Helen knocked again. Then she stooped and placed her lips to the keyhole. "Sue, Sue," she called. "Open door. It's only Helen Mason." But the moaning went on, mingled with the mewing of the cat. It was useless to appeal to the neighbours. Sue Marsh wanted none of them, nor they of Sue Marsh. There was nothing to do but sit down and wait for Sue to recover sufficiently to open the door. Helen sat on the doorstep. The blind white cat crept under her cloak. She was not greatly disturbed. The door would open some time, or it would remain closed. Her own agony was uppermost. There were some hours to pass before Martin came back, and all was won or lost. It mattered nothing to her where those hours were spent. She was on the rack. It might have been awful to some to sit on the other side of that door in the gloom of the weed-grown garden through which the wind sighed, the shadow of a black tree hiding her from sight of the passers-by, if any came. But the awful had been familiar to Helen as far back as memory went. There was something of tragic harmony that the woman who might be left to face the lone should sit and listen in the gloom of twilight to the moaning of the woman who had been left alone 25 years ago. While she sat there, she was planning how to meet every possible mood of Martin's on his return. She became conscious at last that the moaning within the house had ceased. She had tapped the door again. There was utter stillness, but looking through the keyhole she became aware of the glimmer of a moving light. It wavered from side to side. Occasionally there was the sound of teeth a-chatter. She could not see Sue, as some object partially blocked the aperture. "Who's there?" asked a weak voice, tinged with suspicion. "Only Helen," said the woman in the cloak. "Helen what?" cross-examined the voice. "Helen Mason," was the answer. There was the sound of several bolts being pulled back, creaking in their rusty sockets. The door opened. A skeleton thin woman, taper in hand, shedding a light on a pallid, blue-lit face, peered out. Sue Marsh had the face of a corpse, save for the gleam of the deep-set eyes and the keenness with which she surveyed Helen. "Come in," she invited. A gust of wind blew out the light. Into the darkness of the death-like house, Helen followed the woman, whose movements she could discern by the yet lingering spark of the taper. Its smoky warmth of wax was further reminiscent of candles burnt for the dead. The smell of a house situated in a hollow and warmed by few fires greeted Helen like the mouldiness of a vault. A shudder went through her, not of fear, but that she had been called upon to view a fate that might be her own, even at the moment when it was trembling in the balance, whilst in her proud heart was the crushing sense that she lay in the hollow of Martin's hand for his tossing away or keeping. "Mind catching thy head again the rafters," warned the chattering voice. "Jim O'Brien hung hisself on it through getting that lass in trouble. They say it haunts it, but I've never seen him. I'm too old for him, maybe. Too old and too ugly. No, I've never seen him." Her cynical laughter was checked by some spasm that clicked her teeth together. Helen passed from one dark room into a darker one. The mewing of the blind cat went before her. "I'm going to ha' another do," said the voice. "Shape yourself, lass." She evidently dropped into a chair, for there was the creaking of it beneath her, and that rattling sound of shaking limbs, chattering teeth, and the low murmuring had begun again. Helen groped everywhere for matches, but could find none. "Hold me hand," commanded the voice brokenly, "or I'll be shaken to bits." Somehow or other, Helen groped her way to that clammy, bony hand, and steadied its shaking. Then she found the other hand, and held that too, whilst all the time as she knelt in the darkness, it was to her like her own youth, kneeling and holding the hands of her own old age, an old age lonely, dwindled, cold with suspicion and morbidity. But at length it was over. Soon Marsh managed to gasp out where the matches were. Helen found the lamp and lit it. The yellow light lit up the little kitchen, shining on the woman laid back in the chair, her eyes closed, her lips a blue line, the thin, pale hair shaken round her face by the violence of the spasms that had now passed. There was a bed in the corner of the room, and to this Helen dragged her almost helpless, strangely made friend. When Sue was laid on the bed and half undressed, she turned her face towards Helen. Her eyes gleamed in their hollow socket. "I think," she said grudgingly, "they might kindle a bit of fire. They'll happen be cowed." Whilst this order was carried out, she watched her. Helen knew that each tiny cobble of coal was counted. Whilst the fire flickered in the cold chimney, the woman on the bed revealed glimpses of her contorted mind to the pale-faced girl fanning the flames. She lay on her side, her face turned to Helen, who was kneeling on the fender. The cracked blue lips might never have been warmed by a lover's kiss. They were clipped close, veritable purse clasps. She had ripped her bodice open in her struggling for breath during the heart spasm. It was still open. Lead-coloured, withered breasts hung like empty bags, miser's bags that had given nothing. The lonely shadow of herself was on the wall, as it had been these many years, moving when she moved. It was a strong face with good features, but it was ugly. She stood alone, lived alone, and had that ghastly resemblance to a corpse. "I've nobody to thank for now," she said gloatingly, her eyes fixed upon Helen's face. "Not many can say that, lass, eh?" Helen shook her head. It was slightly bowed, that dark head, with the hood slipping from it, almost as if she did not dare to look too closely at that pride-ravaged countenance. There was too much similarity between the fate of this woman and what her own might be for her callous and dispassionate onlooking. If Martin Lever, would not that be the tendency of her own wild nature? To shut off her kind, want no pity from them, no love, no crust of bread. There were only one pair of hands from which she could take love, as a wild bird taking crumbs, and those were Martin's. There was an intensity upon her face as she fanned the fire. She might have been fanning the love in Martin's heart. "No, nobody to thank," murmured the woman on the bed. "It's gospel truth. It's good to think of it. I say it over to myself every night as I put lamp out. Nobody to thank. Nobody to thank." Helen listened to the ritual of a starved life. "And I say I've done very well. There's them can't get along without a chap or some that. There be a lot of trouble, fellies, and what they bring. If men and women never come together, there'd be no trouble. And what brass say? And childer, what are they? Lad, they tackle your brass to bring up into folk, and then they start making trouble for themselves and them as nursed them. It's all to risk, it's all to risk. I've getting along very well, and I've getting nowt. I've ta'en nowt, but some won't like to be lone." She was staring at Helen. Helen was looking back at her. She had ceased to fan the fire. She was listening to this old age of hers, speaking of needing nothing, giving nothing, unaware that its creed was that of those rotting in Fourgates churchyard. The corpse lay there, his pallid lips speaking joylessly of taking no risks, no chances of change, morbidly thankful that it was left undisturbed in the dust. There was a fascination to her in looking at what she might become. She had always looked her fears full in the face. "And when you die," asked Helen's voice, "won't you feel like you're going away only knowing half, like someone who has only had feeling down one side of their body?" Her words trailed off into the silence of the mouldy house. "It's only trouble I've missed, trouble and toil," answered Sue, but her eyes gleamed. The voices of her departed youth called to her. "It's only trouble I've missed, and poverty, and things always in a toss, and I've a pot of brass." "But never to have had a child close to you," said Helen. "To go down into dark without knowing that, and to know that the sun weren't shining on a face that had summat of you in it. To have known to weep for you as you were put into the earth, just to be put into the earth like a stray cat, and tend on it there. Seems like those who haven't had love haven't had a soul. To be buried like a stray cat." The woman on the bed had raised herself on a bony elbow. She looked resentfully at Helen. Through the dust that was strewn upon her came the tumultuous longings of life, the sound and clash of it, the laughter and tears of it. "That thinking of Martin Scott," she said. So unexpectedly that Helen started back as if she had received a blow. "That mad on him. All Fourgates knows on it, even I know, shut off like I'm in me coffin. For that's how thou thinks I am. I can see it in thy face." Helen sat as if carved in stone. "All Fourgates knew? I saw you both stood under yew tree one night," said the old woman. "Joe Gillibrand and me stood there, just about the same, years ago, and he left me." Then her tone changed. She turned eagerly to the woman kneeling motionless on the fender. The fire was dying down, a fitful flame or two vainly trying to fasten round the coals. "Tell me how that's going on," she begged cravingly. "Tell me who's courting and who's to be married. I'm not as dead as thou thinks. I'm alive, burning alive sometimes. All this courting and marrying catches at me. It's the only thing interests me after brass are poured into my lap. I muffle myself up in dark clothes so nobody could tell me if they saw me, and steal out of dark nights to listen to lovers talking behind hedges, and when I come home here I say over again all their silly passionate talk. I'm alive, Helen Mason, alive, though I'm buried. Who'd think an old woman like me would steal about like a ghost of nights? Now aren't I alive?" Helen did not answer. She was clasping and unclasping her hands nervously. She felt sickened. "What's to think of it, lass?" queried the old woman. "Aren't I alive?" Her hollow eye gleamed in its socket. She seemed to challenge Helen, to challenge the dreams of her own youth with its healthfulness and proportion. "Horribly alive," Helen answered shiveringly. "And what does to think on it?" asked the old woman. "I'd rather die," said Helen passionately. What she looked at was a corpse with a corpse's contorted view of life, a corpse whose starved longing for human love had grown into disease, so that now there was nothing left to interest her but gold and sex. "I used to think I'd die," said the old woman, "but I went on living, and at last I got used to it, eating and sleeping just like it mad. Think on it, always th' empty house, and thick were my own feet, and always my shadder there, and meals alone, and the long lone nights. And then I got used to it, and clung to it, and it's strange how we get used to things when we're young. And when I felt alive, and suffering again, I would steal out and listen to lovers. Am I awful, Helen Mason?" Helen looked into the pallid face. "Anyone that doesn't get bread thinks on it all the time," she said. "You've been a-hungered, and you haven't deed, only half deed, that's all. Life isn't like you think. It's full of things besides passion, and I don't think I care for Martin Scott as you cared for Joe Gillibrand." She had confessed to Sue Marsh as she might to the shadow of her own old age. Sue Marsh had spoken as she might to her own lost youth. They looked into each other's eyes. Helen stood tall and pale, like something opposing a flood that was sweeping nearer. The old woman laughed. Her laughter said that she thought Helen very young. "How dost thou like Martin?" she queried. Helen paused. When the words came, they rushed forth from the deeps of silent years. She was not confessing to Sue Marsh, but to that shadow of her own old age. "How?" she crooned. "Why, the ground he walks on, the old coat he wears, when I see him far off and when I see him near, when he frowns and when he smiles, and when he quotes from books and thinks himself wise, and when he thinks himself strong, and all about him, for better or worse, if he were a leper or a murderer, and all against him, that's how." Sue Marsh sank back on her pillow. She was smiling. "That were just how I care for Joe," she said. "Lass, lass, it's best for such as we be to wed wi' one we care naught for. T'other would walk over us." All night long Helen stayed with her, holding her shaking hands when the spasms came on, watching her, fascinated, as she slumbered between when exhausted, listening to the talk of this stout woman, turning always in the direction of sex or gold, the two obsessions of her perverted mind, listening in sickly horror. When she left that house in the grey dawn, she was years older. Something of the scene she had left had eaten into her. She cast fearful glances behind her, leaving that house of living death. She peered in at the farm window and saw the kitchen was empty. Martin had not yet returned. Several things told her this. She passed noiselessly out from the garden and down the hillside, till she came to the wood, athrill with morning. The blue world of the wild hyacinths was a dance. She saw nothing of it. The screws of her rack were turning. She was waiting and listening for Martin to catch the first glimpse of his face as he approached with her destiny in his hand. She was waiting, desperately strong to fight for her very soul.